The date is July 19th. We're in Senator Fred Harris's office in the old Senate office building in Washington. And at this time I'll begin asking Senator Harris some questions in which he compares the state Senate with the U.S. Senate. All right, Senator Harris, first of all, I wonder if you might tell us some of the differences you've noticed between the state Senate and the U.S. Senate since you've arrived in Washington.
Well, strangely enough, the United States Senate is a good deal more informal than is the state Senate. That always surprises people, I think, when I say that. But the rules are the same, the basic rules are the same. Thomas Jefferson's manual for the United States Senate are the basic rules for the United States Senate as they are for the state Senate. But the surprising thing is that the state Senate operates a good deal more rigidly under those rules than does the United States Senate. The United States Senate operates by unanimous consent. The Senate believes in unlimited debate. And I suppose it's the only major deliberative body in the world remaining where unlimited debate is still permitted. But in order to get things done, everything's done by unanimous consent. So that we pass bills here, and this was a tremendous shock to me. We passed bills here, including constitutional amendment referrals, including appropriation bills that might have as high as $5 billion in them, without a roll call vote. It's done by unanimous consent. And I've done this several times. I've presided, of course, more than the Vice President, more than the President pro tempore, and more than any member of the Senate this session. And here's what we'll do, for example, a lot of times. The Majority Leader, who now is Senator Mike Mansfield, will say, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate turn to consideration of calendar items 371 through 390, for example. And I, presiding, will say, the clerk will report. And the clerk will say calendar number 371, S1648, a bill to make an appropriation to the National National Aeronautics and Space Agency. And reported with amendments, the clerk will say. And without the Majority Leader saying anything, there might not be but 3 or 4 people on the floor, I will say, as presiding officer, without objection, the Senate will proceed to its consideration. Pause briefly. Without objection, the committee amendments are agreed to. Pause briefly. Without objection, the bill as amended is passed. And then we proceed to the next one, and we might pass 7 or 8 bills in a very short period of time. Now, the safeguard is that the calendar with those items on it has been printed for a good while. Every morning, each member of the Senate, as I did this morning, looks at the calendar, and he sees what's on there. And I've got several items that are on the calendar that I don't want to be taken up unless I'm present. So I notify the Majority Leader that I have an amendment to a certain bill, or I want to speak against this bill, or I want to speak for this bill. And other members of the Senate do the same, and the item won't be brought up except when that member is here. So it operates very informally. It does a lot of things by unanimous consent, and a lot of things by gentleman's agreement. There's nothing in writing that would require the Majority Leader to have me present when that bill comes up. But just as a matter of courtesy and by gentleman's agreement, he won't bring that bill up unless I'm there. So what senators must do, and all of them do it, if you've got a bill you're against or you have an amendment to, why, you notify the Majority Leader. And if you haven't notified him, then he's at liberty to bring it up and zip it right on through the Senate when he wants to. So I'd say that the major difference is the informality. The other thing that is rather a shock, I think, to anybody who comes up here and looks at the United States Senate, and this is a major difference too, is that while in the state Senate in Oklahoma, members are on the floor. Most of the members are on the floor all the time during the Senate session. They're not here. And we would go for great periods during the day when there might not be but 3 or 4 members of the 100-member United States Senate present. But at roll call time, they come in. And that, I think, is a tremendous shock for people to come into the galleries. I recall when I first came up here years ago as a tourist, expecting to see all the members of the United States Senate down there and in their chairs, and I came in and found two members of the Senate kind of carrying on, it looked like a conversation between themselves that was hardly audible in the galleries. I was tremendously disillusioned. But I've found here that the mail is fantastic. The mail is just, you just can't imagine how much mail we get. We also get a good many more people in person coming to see us here than we did in the State Senate. And then our committee meetings, we have a tremendous amount of committees and subcommittees. I serve on 3 major committees and 8 subcommittees. Now tomorrow, for example, I've got 3 subcommittees meeting simultaneously. Well, of course, it's impossible for me to beat all 3, but I'll make parts of all of them, and primarily will be in the Executive Reorganization Subcommittee because I'm going to chair that, since Senator Ribicoff, the chairman's had a death in his family. But then tomorrow afternoon, for example, at 2 o'clock, my Senate Subcommittee on Permanent Investigations, or Permanent Senate Subcommittee on Investigations, meets at 2 o'clock. The Senate will also be in session at 2 o'clock. Now, this is the thing we wouldn't allow in the State Senate. We had a rule which we rigidly adhered to, that committees could not meet while the Senate was in session. But they've long since found here that the work is so complicated, and so much of it, that the only way committees can operate is to be allowed to meet during the session. They have to get approval. You have to get approval by the Senate to meet. But that's rather automatically given. And so tomorrow, some people will be in the galleries, and they may say, I wonder where the senator from Oklahoma is. I don't see him down there on the floor. Well, I'll be over in my investigating committee, which is meeting. Now, if there's a roll call while we're there, we have a buzzer system throughout the entire Capitol, which announces what's going on in the Senate. And all of us stay in touch through the Senate staff and through our own staff, and we can tell you anytime what's going on. Well, if there's one buzzer sounds, that means we have a roll call vote. And every member of the Senate will stop whatever he's doing, leave the committee, leave his mail, or leave constituents, or whatever it is, and hustle down there to vote, and they all come in and vote. And it means then that you've got to study these issues long in advance. You've got to study them in committee, and you've got to read, and you've got to depend on your staff, and that's a great improvement over the legislature. In Oklahoma, members of the State Senate don't have sufficient staff. But here we have staff, and we're able to prepare well in advance. And so debate is not very important here, except very rarely, and that's somewhat different. But the work is much more complicated, and there's much more of it. So those are some of the things I think that are differences. By and large, it's about the same. It's been an easy transition for me. And whoever serves in a legislative body, I think, whether he serves in the Parliament or the state legislature or in the United States Congress, has about the same kind of responsibilities. And you get used to them in one body, you will find them about the same in the other body.
Senator Harris, can you give us some of your first impressions of the Senate when you arrived here?
Well, I've mentioned some of them. I think the two main impressions about the operation of the Senate was, first, I was tremendously surprised at how much mail we had. I hate to keep coming back to the mail,
right,
but it dominates our whole life here. And I would say that during this first session that I've been in the Senate, and I've got about 15 staff members, I would say that 75% of my time and staff time has been involved with mail. People always wonder if you ever see their letters and what effect it has. I can say for our standpoint, it has a lot of effect on us. We spend about 75% of our time answering mail, and that was a tremendous shock, how much mail we'd have. The other thing was the empty galleries, which I've mentioned, an empty chamber. People in the galleries have, I'm sure, the same feeling that I had the first time I saw the Senate, why they weren't there, which we've already discussed. But I'd say you go through 3 stages coming to the Senate. 2 of them are the ones that Harry Truman talked about. You've heard about all these members of the Senate, and you read about them, and a good many members are former cabinet members, and many of them you know about from reading in the newspapers and so forth. So you go through about 3 stages. The first 2 are Harry Truman's. He said when he first came here, he looked around and he said to himself, how in the world did I ever get up here with all these distinguished members of the Senate? And he said after I'd been here a couple of weeks, I looked around and I said, how in the world did all these other rascals ever get up here? But you come to a third step, I have, and all members of the Senate do, and that is that this is an impressive group, a very impressive group. And even a member that you hadn't thought, you wondered about what his long suit was. I can think of one, for example, Senator Bob Byrd of West Virginia. A very quiet member of the Senate. I've had very little conversation with him until lately, and I'd never seen him make any remarks at all on the Senate floor. But he's chairman of the subcommittee of appropriations on the District of Columbia. And I was in the chair one day when he was reporting for that committee. We were handling the appropriations for District of Columbia. And for 45 straight minutes, without referring to a staff member and without referring to notes, he discussed the District of Columbia budget, talked, I'd suppose, at least 100 separate budget item figures down to the penny. He would say, for the police department, this bill provides $27,394,433, which will provide, and he'd talk about how many policemen and so forth. He did all that without notes. And I looked down to the parliamentarian, Doc Riddick, and I said, Doc, did you ever see anything like that? And he said, Senator, he does that every time. So all of them will bear inspection. They're all rather impressive people, and they're good to work with. It's a very courteous, gentlemanly group, the Senate is, and I'd say those are some of my main first impressions since I've been here.
Senator William S. White, in his book Citadel, said that there was an inner club in the Senate and an outer club, and I wonder if you would comment upon that.
I think the Citadel is a real classic, and I don't think anybody could spend any more fruitful time if they wanted to understand the United States Senate than the time necessary to read that book. I think that's true. I think, and it's true of any organization that I ever belonged to, PTA or any kind of group, there's always a bunch that are running the thing. Now, nobody could tell you for sure who was in the group. Everybody hopes they are. What you could do, I could tell you some that are not, and I could tell you some that I know are, but it'd get rather fuzzy after that. But there's always, in any group, there's a bunch who know the rules well, who know how to operate in a legislative context, and a legislative job is different from any other kind of job there is. There just isn't another job like it. And there's some people who take to it immediately. Governors traditionally have a rather hard time getting going in the United States Senate because they're used to the executive position where they're the main show. They're used to making up their minds and everybody else doing what they want. Well, that isn't the way a legislature operates. And a fellow who comes here from the Congress or from a state legislature generally fits in a little quicker than the fellow who served in an executive position. And there are fellows that somehow, and I can name you one, Senator Richard Russell of Georgia, who is ranked second in the United States Senate in seniority. He's chairman of the Senate Armed Forces Committee. He's a ranking Democratic member of the Senate Appropriations Committee. He's been around here nearly 30 years. And he's an amazingly competent man. Harry Truman said in his memoirs that except for the accident of his birth, except for the fact that Richard Russell comes from Georgia and gets in trouble on one issue every session, and that's the civil rights issue, he would have been president of the United States, and he would have made a great president. He's a fellow who not only is very smart, but he is steeped in the ways and traditions of the Senate. He knows the Senate. It's his whole life and has been for 30 years. And he's not the kind of fellow who tries to make people do what he wants. I've never heard him make a speech as such on the floor of the Senate. But he's a man of tremendous power. And until his recent health problems, he has emphysema, and which caused him to be out of the session for about 2 months this year. He has been a tremendous power in the Senate. Well, I know Dick Russell's a member of what Bill White calls the establishment, and I could tell you some others who are. But it's people who just, they know how to do things somehow, and they work at it. I'd say first you got to be smart. You've got to know how to operate in a legislative context. You've got to know how to work with other people to get things done, and then you've got to be willing to work a good deal more than anybody else does.
You've got to know what you're doing and let other people know that you know what you're doing. That's
You've got to be helpful. There's so many opportunities. A man who wants to be effective in a legislative position looks for ways to help others. There's so many opportunities to be of help to another member of the Senate. I can give you one example. I serve on the Public Works Committee. I'm the only man from our region, that several state region, who does. Well, people from Mississippi and Arkansas and Texas, Kansas, Missouri, Louisiana, they look to me to help on their projects on the Public Works Committee because I'm the only member of our region. Well, I welcome the opportunity to do that. And just here lately, John McClellan of Arkansas had a problem. Had to do with capitalization of some sewer and water improvements at Pine Bluff, Arkansas, that we got the Corps of Engineers to pay for. And they ought to have, because the needs were as a result of some work was being done down there. But John's not on the committee and couldn't have done that, except I made the motion and the committee did it. And it ought to have been done. It was a good, worthy project. Shortly thereafter, I had a project before the Senate Subcommittee on Public Works Appropriations. John's a member of that. Well, I was able to go to John and explain my program to him, and John's a very straight-laced senator with lots of integrity, and if my project hadn't been worthwhile, he wouldn't have had anything to do with it. But I was able to convince him that we needed it. The dam up in the Panhandle there, one of the real drought-stricken areas perennially of our state where we need some water, and John helped me get construction appropriation out of that subcommittee. Well, you've got to learn to work with other people, and I think this, and I left this out in talking about what Bill White says. Of the other qualities that I mentioned that a member of the establishment ought to have, and I just use that word for convenience, I really mean if he's going to be effective in the Senate, and that's what we're talking about. If he's going to be effective in the Senate, he's got to have some intelligence, as I said. He's got to know how to operate in a legislative context. He's got to work a lot harder than most people do. And then I think the last thing, and this is very important, he's got to have a national outlook. You're never going to be an effective member of a legislative body unless you've got a general outlook. If you're provincial and parochial in your outlook, if I thought only of Oklahoma, didn't see the national issues, if I wasn't interested in the tremendous problems of water shortage that New York City's got, or if I wasn't interested in the tremendous problems of mass transportation that New England and the Eastern Seaboard have, or the great air and water pollution problems that Baltimore has, for example, I'd never be an effective member of the Senate, and that's why I'm interested in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, for example. You've got to have broad outlook, and that's the point that Bill White makes in the Citadel, which I think is well taken.
So the congressman who comes to Washington, who's only here to take something back home, is really not going to be very effective, is he?
No, I don't think his people will send him back very long, because people are pretty smart, you know. They know a lot more than some of us politicians give them credit for. They're not going to send him back. They're not going to send him back if they don't think he's a United States senator. And he's never going to get any respect among his fellows unless he's a United States senator.
Senator, you're on the Committee on Government Operations, and I wonder if you might tell us a little about the objectives of that committee.
Well, the Government Operations Committee was set up in 1947 or 8 in the Congressional Reorganization Act. Its function is to serve as the legislative oversight committee, or the legislative oversight of all that's done by the federal government. Now, that's a large order. The Reorganization Act also set up the General Accounting Office, which gives the Congress some post-appropriation budgetary control. The General Accounting Office and the Comptroller General report directly to the Government Operations Committee. And and our job and his job is to see what happens with this money after we appropriate it. Now, we have the Appropriations Committee and the Budget Department who work together to see what will be appropriated. But the Congress saw what every legislative body sees, and that is that you have a tremendous problem of following up afterwards. Because next year, you're talking about the next year after that, generally, and you haven't really got time to stop and see, well, what did they do with last year's money? So this committee was set up, the Government Operations Committee, as a committee which would oversee the expenditures of all the appropriations the Congress made last year. And therefore, it covers the waterfront. Now, I didn't know about the Government Operations Committee, and I didn't list that as a committee that I wanted to be on. But John McClellan, who's chairman of it, from Arkansas, came to see me and asked me if I would I serve on it. He wanted me to. And I told him if he wanted me to, I would, and I did. Well, I discovered that it's probably one of the most exciting committees in the United States Senate. And it's a tremendous opportunity for a new member of the Senate to learn something about government in a detailed way, the vast, sprawling complex of the federal government. Jack Kennedy served on this committee before he became president. Lyndon Johnson served on it up until he became vice president. And Hubert Humphrey served on it before and up until he became vice president. It's a committee where you can really learn and you can have some effect upon how money is spent after it's appropriated. I serve on 3 subcommittees of that committee. There are 5 subcommittees. Robert Kennedy of New York and I were the 2 additions to the parent committee this time on government operations. I went then on a subcommittee called the Permanent Senate Investigating Committee. And John McClellan asked me to be on that. He chairs that subcommittee. The Senate Investigating Subcommittee, that permanent committee, was set up also in 1948 because it was found that there was tremendous overlapping and duplication by committees, that each committee was carrying on investigations and so forth. And it was felt that that could be better done by one committee. So this is the investigating arm of the Senate. This year we've been involved in banking inquiry on the laws and administration, the banking system in this country, and I think we will make some very detailed recommendations for improvements. We're also right now going into some reported or alleged abuses of the expenditure of union welfare funds of a particular set of unions in New York City. In addition to that, the State Department asked us to handle some reported misuse and funds and fraudulent conduct in regard to expenditure of foreign aid funds in the country of Iran. We handled that in secret sessions in a classified way, though we made a public report. So it covers the waterfront, that subcommittee does, on investigations, and is directed by the Senate to conduct the ones we're in now and the ones we will be in the future. I serve on another subcommittee of the Government Operations Committee, and that's one headed by Senator Abraham Ribicoff of Connecticut, called Executive Reorganization. The Executive Reorganization Act provides that the President of the United States may, by executive order, reorganize the executive department. He cannot create a new department, but within certain limits he can cut out a function of one department, or he can change it around or transfer and so forth. And then he must file that reorganization order with both houses of the Congress. And if within 60 days thereafter neither house of the Congress has passed a resolution disapproving the plan, it goes into effect. Well, in the Senate, those filed orders come to our committee on subcommittee on executive reorganization. Tomorrow, for example, I will be chairing the subcommittee on a hearing on reorganization plan number 3, having to do with the administration of the labor laws. Some changes that have been made, and there's considerable controversy about whether the plan ought to be approved. In addition to that, we handled in that subcommittee this year the hearings on the establishment of a new cabinet-level Department of Housing and Urban Development, which President Johnson recommended, and our committee reported that bill out favorably with some amendments. We are also now in the process of carrying on a study on the role of the federal government in automobile safety. And our chairman has announced plans for a very detailed and extensive study of the executive department generally and how its lines of administration and so forth might be improved, and how the operation of the great sprawling complex of the federal government might be made more efficient and responsive and responsible. And we've been carrying on some preliminary conversations with 9 outstanding political science professors from colleges throughout the country in that. So that's a real study committee. And then I serve on another subcommittee of the Government Operations Committee, and that's the Subcommittee on National Security and International Operations, which is headed by Senator Henry Jackson of Washington. This is a committee which is very well known among political science professors generally throughout the country, and some of its work in the past has been used for textbooks in political science courses. This year, we're commencing hearings on the staffing, well, not just staffing, but generally the United States membership, staffing, and activities in connection with international organizations and alliances. We've concentrated at the first on our balance of payments problem, and particularly, therefore, with the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. But we'll go into such alliances as NATO and CETO, the Organization of American States, the United Nations, and others. And I think that probably we'll come out with, if history is any indicator as to what this committee has done in the past, some very detailed recommendations for our staffing and activities in these international organizations. So you can see from the scope of the 3 subcommittees I serve on that that's a real study committee and an opportunity to learn.
Senator, I don't see how you keep up the killing pace. That's the thing that astounds me about the Senate, really. It seems to me that every man really needs to be 3 different people.
Yeah, it is almost an impossible job. It's an exciting job. Nobody would quit. I think the old axiom or maxim somebody said, few die and none resign, is right. Nobody'd quit because they love it. It's the kind of thing I'd be interested in. I'd be interested in the Dominican Republic or South Vietnam or Medicare or any of these issues, federal aid education, if I were just an ordinary citizen. So here I have an opportunity to be interested in them and have some effect upon the decisions which are made concerning those great issues. But I say this, it is the hardest way to make a living, I believe I have found.
Senator, do you have any unusual anecdotes you might be able to relate to our classes of any of your experiences in your campaign or here in Washington?
Oh, goodness, I have a lot, but something happened just the other day that might be interesting. As I said, we operate in the Senate rather on an informal basis.
Go ahead, Senator.
Well, I was just going to say, I was saying a while ago about how the Senate operates in a rather informal way. Many things are handled on a voice vote. I had a couple amendments to the Medicare bill, which the nursing homes wanted and which I thought were good amendments. But I couldn't get Clint Anderson of New Mexico, an outstanding senator, and the man who was handling the Medicare bill, to agree to the amendments. And health, education, and welfare were against the amendments. And you could count noses just a little and know that on a roll call vote I couldn't get the amendments adopted. But nevertheless, I wanted to make a record on the 2 amendments and also make some argument in the record so that we'd have some basis for argument for amending the law once it had gone into effect. And I got Clint Anderson to agree that if I'd put the amendments up and not go to a lot of trouble to have a roll call and slow things down, that he'd promised me they'd set up a study committee to study the nursing home situation and their role in medical care and come back with some recommendations next January. So we agreed that what I would do would be, I'd just simply get up and offer my amendments and put my statement, rather than make a long speech, put my statement in the record. Clinton Anderson would get up and say what he'd said to me privately, that they would initiate a study on this and so forth, and hope they'd vote down the amendments, and then we would very quickly vote the amendments down by voice vote. Well, Tom McIntyre of New Hampshire was in the chair, and we did exactly that. But Clint Anderson talks in a rather low voice, and Tom couldn't hear him. He simply got the drift that Clinton was saying some nice things about me, and he was. Saying about how I appreciated the way I was handling this and so forth. But Tom got the impression that Clint was saying the amendments are acceptable to us. So when we'd both finished speaking, Tom was in the chair. He said, all in favor say aye, all opposed no. The ayes have it. The amendments are adopted. He thought that was the signal he'd got. Well, everybody jumped up and they couldn't think what to do. Somebody was saying roll call and everything else to try to undo it. Mansfield, the majority leader, said, I ask unanimous consent that the vote be taken again. Well, this time Clint got up and made it clear that he didn't want the amendments. Tom then put the question, all in favor aye, all opposed no. The noes have it. And that's the way it appears in the record, that we voted first for them and then voted next against them. So little funny things happen like that. I told Tom McIntyre I believe I owed him a vote on something.
Oh, man. Well, Senator Harris, we really appreciate this opportunity, this interview, and this material will be of tremendous value to our classes.
Thank you very much.